I'm going to skip over part B, which is how we were able to finance this building with very little cash in. But very quickly what we did is we were able to convince a lender and the lender's appraiser that the expenses of $37,500 were too high. One reason was that the seller was not managing the building himself. He had a management company in there that was charging $5,000 a year. We say to the bank and the bank's appraiser, we're going to do that ourselves. The expenses should be not $37,500 but $32,500. And in addition, Mr. Lender and Mr. Appraiser, you are not going to believe that this seller, he's kind of an old timer, he wasn't as sharp as he should have been, agreed to an 8% cap rate. My gosh in heaven, in these times, with this kind of deal, Mr. Banker, Mr. Appraiser, with this kind of office market, with interest rates being where they are, really the appropriate cap rate was 7.5%, not 8%. We were able to buy this deal really well. And if you look at the bottom there, just those two things, just convincing the lender and the appraiser that there was $5,000 too much on the expense side and the appropriate cap rate should have been 7.5 instead of 8, gives you a value of this building of $1,060,000. We paid $800 for it. Now you also, I don't want to neglect this, you also have to convince the lender that you're going to be able to lease that last 1,000 square feet. So it's three things. You haven't touched the building yet. You haven't even gone in the building. And if the lender accepts and the appraiser accepts your argument on these 3 points, you've just added, well, let's see, you bought for $800 and now it's valued at $1,060,000. All right, now this is basic stuff, but understanding it is really, really critical if you're going to build on your knowledge and get into more sort of complex and advanced scenarios. Now let's fast forward 2 years. We've decided we want to sell our building. Oh, by the way, the result of convincing the lender that the value of the property is $1,060,000 is that you've just about financed out. You've cashed out. He's going to give you, say, 75% of $1,060,000 or a $795,000 loan. You bought the building for $800,000, so you pretty much have cashed out. Now, fast forward, we're now a seller. We have, in fact, lowered the expenses by $5,000. Some of our rents have rolled. Remember I said one lease comes up every year for the next couple of years. We've improved those just by $1 or so a foot. Not dramatic, not a big deal. We didn't go in and make wholesale changes to the building. We didn't even touch the building. We were just able to convince the tenants that rents had increased, and we were able to raise the rents by $1 a foot as leases rolled. We managed the building ourselves. We've now been able to cut the expenses by $5,000, increase the gross rents a bit. Our new NOI is $85,500. Now you all are the buyer. I'm the seller of this building. And here's what I'm saying to you. You know, I really bought this building well. I found an old timer. He'd had this building a long time. He sold me this building at an 8 cap rate. Can you believe it? My gosh in heaven, it's a 7 cap rate deal all day long. It's a great location. It's a good building. The economy's good. Everybody's interested in real estate. Now, just if I'm able to convince you of that, and I'm able to show you my new NOI, flip the page to page 3, I've now convinced you it's a 7 cap rate deal, and look what happens. They're 0.14. Dividing our new NOI of $85,500 by 7, we now have a value of the building of $1,220,000. So we've added about $400,000 of value in 2 years. What did we do? Well, we rolled some leases, raised the rents $1 a foot. We managed the building ourselves. That's a really not a big deal with 4 tenants, you know, collecting some rents and paying some bills. We convinced the lender that the appropriate cap rate was less than we paid when we bought. We convinced a buyer that the appropriate cap rate was less than what we bought, and we just added $400,000 of value. Remember my theme. How do we add value with the least amount of input? So understanding and mastering those techniques is critical. Now, this is a simplistic deal, but understanding these basic concepts is critical if you want there's an advanced deal where some buddies of mine, again, not doing a whole lot to the building, just understanding how to manipulate these concepts, were able to invest about $100,000 or $200,000 and make $3 million in an 18-month period of time. I write about that in the book. By the way, I don't care if you don't buy my book. I really am not here selling you on anything. I'm here because I'm frustrated and angry when I see these infomercials and people trying to make it all sound easy and risk-free. There are plenty of good books out there. So if I mention a book, it's not to persuade you one way or another. But you'll see the advanced concepts if you want to read that one, and really be a great way to test yourself. It'll be a really good way for you to see if you understand some of these concepts. All right, so that's sort of leg A of our 3 legs of what the successful real estate entrepreneurs ahead of us has done. Let's talk about leg B, strategies that successful real estate entrepreneurs have applied to make a lot of money with a minimum input to the real estate. All right, I need you to go back 40 years ago. You're in Seattle, Washington, and you learn about this big industrial building for sale. And it's empty or about to be empty, and the market value of the building is, let's say, $5 per square foot. It's a 100,000 square foot building, so your potential, let's call it $5 per square foot net. Your potential net operating income is $500,000. Let's say a cap rate for this type of building would be a 10, so the value of the building is about $5 million. So let's say you buy it. And remember, we're back 40 years ago. So you're walking through your building one day, and you think, whoa, boy, I hope I did the right thing. How am I going to find a 100,000 square foot tenant at $5 a square foot for this building? And you really aren't sure what to do next. And one day you get a call from your neighbor. And he says to you, hey, Bill, I got a whole slew of stuff in my garage, and I don't know what to do with it. You got that big 100,000 square foot building. You mind if I store some stuff in your big building? And I'll pretend I'm this smart guy 40 years ago. And I say, sure. So I go and I carve out a little area of the building, let's say 8 by 10, and I put some 2x4s in plywood or something. And I say, okay, here, use this little section. He says, how much? I said, how about $100 a month? Fine. He does it. He tells a friend of his, lives down the street. That guy calls me. Hey, I got so much junk in my attic, I need a place to store it. You got some more room in that big building? Sure. I make another 8 by 10 little cubicle, cost me nothing. I decide, you know what, I think the rent should be $200 a month. I keep doing this. Eureka. I just invented the self-storage business. And what did I do to the real estate? Almost nothing. I just started divvying it up into all these little cheap cubicles with some 2x4 sheetrock, and that's it, some padlocks. And this is an extremely important point to understand and how to get rich in real estate. If you can buy a building using one methodology evaluation, and then change it, make a paradigm shift in how the building is to be valued and perceived, you're going to make a lot of money. And that's what happened 40 and 50 years ago when people would buy these big industrial buildings, turn them into self-storage facilities. They bought them on the basis of an industrial rent of $5 a square foot, and they were renting out these little cubicles at $50 a square foot. And if you have enough of those cubicles, you got a much, much more valuable piece of property with very little input. Building some cheap little cubicles and putting a big sign on self-storage. Now, of course, that business gets more mature. And what happens is sellers of industrial buildings or big warehouses figure out that there's a lot of entrepreneurs like you and me who are turning their building into self-storage facilities. So when they're now selling these buildings, they're no longer a big industrial building at $5 a square foot. It's a potential self-storage facility.